In April 2018, the UK hosted the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, heretofore referred to as CHOGM, where leaders from all the member countries gathered in London and Windsor. The purpose of CHOGM is to celebrate the Commonwealth's diversity and values and for world leaders to agree on how to work together to create a more secure, prosperous, sustainable and fair Commonwealth for all its citizens. Following this, the UK government announced a number of new initiatives to assist Fiji in achieving the goals from the outcome of this year's CHOGM. Tonight, we have our guest, the British High Commissioner to Fiji and the head of the South Pacific Network, Melanie Hopkins, to discuss this at length. Good evening and welcome to the show.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you on the program, Ms. Hopkins. So to start off, before we discuss the outcomes of the April meeting, let's just discuss the general overview of some of the growing multilateral relations in the region. Tell us about some of the new work that the British High Commission is doing.
Yes. The UK has long been a strong supporter of multilateral work throughout the Pacific, and in fact the UK is the largest funder of the World Bank's IDA programme, it's called, which delivers a significant aid in the Pacific and is radically scaling up its delivery. UK is also a leading funder of ADB, and we're looking at increasing our funding, and then ADB in turn is looking at increasing its delivery in the Pacific. So whilst you might not see a lot of Union Jacks around the place, rest assured we estimate that in the overall region there's around £40 million per year of UK funding that goes to the Pacific's development.
And when you say region, what kind of countries are involved in this?
So all of the countries in the region, so specifically Kiribati, Tuvalu, and then stretching through to PNG, places like that.
And looking at local work, money that's been not pledged, rather, that's been set aside for helping Fiji to actually achieve the nationally determined contributions, £1.2 million. Now, of course, all of that money isn't coming straight to Fiji. That's being spread out throughout the region. How does that work?
Yes. So in the run-up to the CHOGM, the British government was really keen to be able to assist countries of the Pacific, including Fiji, in taking forward the outcomes of the CHOGM. What we didn't want to have was a lovely meeting in London where everybody has a wonderful time and then there's no follow-up. And this helping around nationally determined contributions was in keeping with one of the key themes of the CHOGM, which was about climate change. And Germany locally had taken the lead in setting up a sort of hub in the Pacific, which would be a repository of knowledge and best practice on how to reduce carbon emissions. Now that's important for Fiji, but it's also important for those countries like the UK that really want to partner closely with Fiji in the international organisations, because it enables the small island states of the Pacific to be able to come to the big developed countries and say, look, even we small countries managed to do our job on the emissions, where's your larger job? And enables them to be able to really push ambitious positions at those negotiations.
I mean, it's interesting if we can stray just outside of the region for a moment. You mentioned some of the big countries, especially the notorious Mr. Donald Trump, who has famously decided to pull out of the agreement.
Yes.
What is your position on that? I mean,
yes.
Of course, we know the answer to the question,
yes.
and of course, the British Prime Minister, Ms. May, has also spoken about it recently at
yes.
the United Nations. For the benefit of our viewers, what is the British High Commission's position on that?
Yes. Well, there's a very strong position by the British government overall in supporting the Paris Agreement. And there have been a number of conversations with the US administration, publicly and privately, on that. And it's no secret that the British government would prefer the US to be within. But the most important thing is this agreement overall keeps moving forward. And so as part of that, we've worked very closely with Fiji as presidency of COP23. We provided £1.7 million of funding to the Secretariat to help that just get established. And then we've coordinated and we've sort of swapped ideas on tactics and strategies as well. Because the really important part there is that the large countries are doing their bit in terms of implementing the commitments made under the Paris Agreement. UK has a great story to tell on that, and it's part of our job to nudge the other big countries to make sure they do likewise.
Well, coming back to Fiji, in November 2017, the Honourable Prime Minister, Mr. Bainimarama, launched the Regional Pacific NDC Hub. How much money was set aside for that?
So that's around 1.4 million. And again, this was around taking forward one of the outcomes of the CHOGM. But the great thing about that is it's pan-Pacific as well, and so it's an opportunity to work not just with Fiji, but with other Commonwealth states in the Pacific as well.
And who regulates this?
So the fund is run by a partnership which is headed by GIZ, the German development agency locally.
So far, are you happy with the work that's being done to develop this?
It's an early stage, and obviously all the consultations are ongoing, but we're very satisfied with the consultations that were held with all the governments and stakeholders a few weeks ago here in Suva.
And in relation to the NDCs, what can we expect in the future?
I think you can find concrete support to governments of small island states, drawing in the experience of larger countries and things that have worked, but equally things that haven't worked. And as I say, that's important for Fiji as it goes through its own environmental reforms, but it's also important to maintain the momentum behind the international negotiations.
Now, the Fijian government had put out a publication, which was the NDC Implementation Roadwork Plan from 2017 all the way till 2030. Do you think that the roadmap that had been put out, do you think that it's sustainable? Do you think that we can actually achieve some of the goals that have been set out?
Well, it's not appropriate for me to comment on specific policies of the Fiji government, but what I can say is this hub is designed exactly to enable those conversations and to be able to look again, including at policies that have already been established, in order to work out where the gaps are and how we can best work together.
And some of the work locally that's being done by the Fiji government, are you able to comment on that?
In what way?
In terms of the budget implementations and on how Fijians are being taught to handle climate change.
I think that's more a matter for the Fijian government. But what we do really like seeing is actually there's a big conversation around climate. I was at the Commonwealth Education Ministers meeting in February, and it was great to visit some schools as part of that and to see all of the kids talking about climate change, because it's only through really empowering the next generation that we'll be able to hold future political leaders to account and make sure that this really delivers the change that all of us wanted to when we signed up to the Paris Agreement.
I see. Well, the British government is also partnered up with major regional organizations like SPREP and also with SPC. Recently there was also a signing that was done, but we'll explore more on that after the break. Welcome back. Now, Ms. Hopkins, looking at the partnership with SPC, recently you had signed with them and given £1.8 million for some of the projects that they have, specifically for the Pacific Commonwealth Equality Project. Please elaborate on that.
So, human rights and the importance of values and the importance of strengthening democratic institutions over time was one of the key themes that came out of the leaders' communique at CHOGM. So all 52 countries signed up to that communique. And actually leaders drew particular attention to the importance of national human rights institutions and also to be able to fulfill all of the different UN processes that countries are required to go through on human rights. And we felt that whilst the UK had long been an important funder of SPC through its membership of the European Union, the time had probably come to do some work directly with SPC as well, the South Pacific Community. And we believe this is the first programme that the UK has done directly with SPC in a number of years. So it's an exciting moment. The launch is happening this week in Kiribati, and it'll be a chance really to see how all of these grand concepts can then be transferred to small island jurisdictions on the ground. And part of the exciting thing about this programme is that it will look right across the range of human rights indicators. So look at building up institutions and institutional awareness, but also look at specific UN processes and supporting civil society to be able to do all of that more effectively.
So across the board, I mean, you're working with a number of Pacific Island countries, and then the state of human rights and the institutions within those countries, there's quite a difference. How are you working around that?
So SPC is the lead on that, and obviously as a regional organisation it is best placed to be able to work with the fantastic diversity that's in the Pacific as well. But I think by going to and partnering with a regional organisation, you overcome the most significant hurdle, which is really about understanding how these great concepts around human rights can apply in small jurisdictions.
Well, this is going to be implemented by the SPC's Regional Rights Resource Team, and like I mentioned, 1.8 million pounds that's been set aside. Some might think that that is quite a large sum, and then us at home in Fiji would think we're receiving quite a lot of money, but that's not the case. That's been spread across the region. How much of the pie is Fiji getting, though?
So that will be a question for SPC to work out with all of its stakeholders. But what I can say is it's a multi-year programme. And you're right, it is a significant sum, but I think that's a sign that the UK is committed to this area and was part of a larger programme of announcements at the CHOGM itself. There are other areas in which we're helping Fiji and other Pacific Islands on human rights as well. So, for example, we've appointed some new human rights advisors to a Commonwealth office in Geneva to help provide advice to small island states, some, not all of whom are represented in Geneva. So if we really want these human rights systems to work for individuals on the ground, but also for countries, we need to be providing more practical expertise.
We'd like to investigate just a little further into that when you say human rights. Of course, we won't ask you to directly comment on the state of human rights in any of these countries, but just in your experience around the region, what are some areas that you think could improve further?
Well, I think we'd really like to see more national human rights institutions across the Pacific. So there are a couple of countries that have one, and Fiji is one of those. And there are a number of steps that need to be taken for national human rights institutions in order to be able to meet the internationally recognised status. And that's a really important part of the human rights process. And for us in the UK, when we established our human rights institution, it was a turning point for us, to be frank. And it enabled a much better and more constructive dialogue with civil society, but it also helped government to understand the areas that they needed to prioritise.
Well, one of the three components of the Pacific Commonwealth Equality Project is not only to empower, to actually sort out human rights, but also gender equality commitments. And of course, in the Pacific, there's a culture of silence. Women generally tend to be on the receiving end of a lot of violence and a lot of suppression. What are your comments on that?
Well, this is an area that has to be addressed, and one programme alone through SPC won't do this. What has to happen is that gender needs to be mainstreamed throughout all programmes. And that sounds quite an easy thing to say. In reality, it's much more difficult for governments, for regional organisations, for international organisations to deliver. But in the case of the UK, we now have a Foreign Secretary's special representative on gender, and I am required to account to this person each year how everything that we do is supporting gender equality, not just a programme that might have gender on it or an element of a programme. But for example, if we are delivering a training course in Fiji, would we allow single-sex applicants for, single-sex cohorts to go through for the training course? No. It's really challenging us to look at how we are, through every step of our foreign policy, promoting gender equality.
Well, you do get out quite often on the ground, and you happen to witness quite a lot of things on your own. Have you ever faced any personal incidents where you've met with obstacles?
That's an interesting question. I have to say, in the early days when I arrived and I would say I'm the British High Commissioner, people were always very surprised. And I remember I had a friend who is based here in Suva, and he was a middle-aged man with white hair. And I realised quite quickly if I went and he was near, they would go, "High Commissioner, please, can you help us with this?" or "Welcome, High Commissioner." And so I quickly learnt to go on my own. But I have to say that there's been a marvellous welcome to me and to my family here in Fiji. I think people are quite excited to see a female doing this role as well. And it's a great honour for me to be the first British female High Commissioner.
It's exciting for us as well. So if we can get back to the action plans, and one of the things that was mentioned was one of the plans was to create platforms for members of parliament and civil society leaders to champion and advance human rights. So besides SPC, are you working with a lot of civil society organizations in Fiji?
Yes. So besides SPC, obviously we have a wide-ranging development programme, including through the European Union, where the UK funds about 15% of the contribution of the European Union. And they have separate programmes, dedicated programmes around civil society, which is an essential part of any thriving democracy and is an essential part of a sustainable democracy. But I want to come back to your point on parliaments too, because that's another really important part of the equation. The UK supports Fiji's parliament in a number of ways. Firstly, we're supporting it directly, so we're partnering with UNDP to support along with a number of other countries, to support the training programmes that are done for Parliament. But then we also play a lead role in the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, which also provides extra training. So if we see, for example, at the next election, many new parliamentarians, it's likely they will be receiving training that comes from the UK in one way or another.
Thank you for that comment. Now, the Commonwealth, the Marine Economies program is also very interesting, but we'd like to discuss more on that after this break. Welcome back.
So just before we went to break, we were discussing some of the work that the British High Commission does with civil societies and the Parliament in Fiji. And I noticed that you mentioned the EU. Now, with Brexit, I know that this might be a sensitive or a bit of a touchy subject. Let me just ask, what does the future of this partnership look like with Brexit?
I think you're right to ask it. It's the question that everybody's asking. But to be honest, I don't think here in the Pacific you'll see a huge difference. So obviously the UK is transitioning to a different sort of relationship with the EU, but here our practical cooperation on issues such as climate, on foreign policy, on supporting countries to deliver human rights commitments, all of that is going to stay the same. So you will continue to see very, very close cooperation between the UK and the EU here in the Pacific as well.
Well, that's assuring.
Well, moving on to the Commonwealth Marine Economies Program, or we can just say CMEP. Would you please elaborate on that? It sounds very interesting, but I'm sure there's many people out there who don't understand what it's all about.
Yes. So CMEP as a concept, this idea of having a Commonwealth role looking at how countries can sustainably develop their ocean resources, this really came out of the previous CHOGM, which was held in Malta. And at the back of that, there was a clear desire for countries to access more expertise on how to develop marine resources. And on the back of that, the British government announced a programme of supporting small island states who are Commonwealth partners in particular. And this programme was launched in the Pacific. The Honourable Attorney General attended the launch for us for that that was in 2016. And since then, the programme's really gone from strength to strength. So at the recent CHOGM, the British government announced a further £9 million of funding, which goes to all Commonwealth small island states. But there's a lot of activity going on here in the Pacific. So to give you some examples, for example, we've worked very well with the Hydrography Office and with the Ministry of Defence about updating maps and the digitisation of maps. Mm-hmm. We've worked with a number of countries on developing or starting to develop marine action plans, which really put alongside the need to conserve and protect ocean resources with the need to have sustainable economic development as well. So what we saw from this programme was there were a lot of interventions that would either help you on the conservation side or on the economic development side, but there were relatively few partners who were willing to bring those together. And this programme means that there are experts from the UK that come out regularly and are embedded with their Pacific counterparts.
And these experts are from the United Kingdom Hydrographic Office, the Centre for Environment, Fisheries and Aquaculture Science, and the National Oceanography Centre. Quite a mouthful to say all of that. But they're all coming down and they've got different projects that they're undertaking. Some of the projects, of course, is marine data collection for environmental resilience. And given climate change and with COP23 goals that we have, there's so much that needs to be done. Now, what's the progress like so far? So
we've had really good cooperation on all of the programmes, but this is just the start. And we think under this next round of the programme, we'll be able to do a lot more. But the key point is actually pulling together all of these separate parts into one coherent whole. So we will be encouraging countries to develop national marine action plans where they don't already exist, that really bring together perhaps what a country is doing under its under its Paris Agreement commitments, alongside the need to provide economic development.
So let's, if we can get a bit more insight into these marine action plans, which countries from PCIDS are more developed? In this sense.
So the conversation is happening across the region at the moment, and even where we've seen some countries already have them, with the expertise that's been brought in, they're looking at redoing them. But the range of activities that's included under the marine action plans is really exciting. So, for example, in Vanuatu, this programme provided a model for the government of Vanuatu to help decide how best to develop a key port. In another country in the Pacific, there's been a lot of work done on seabed mapping, which has also provided a really useful resource for countries to draw on. But actually, quite a lot of it comes back to maps. And as we've worked with partners on this, we've seen that in many cases, the original maps from Captain Cook's time are still being used in some cases as well. So it's been a real delight to be able to work in Fiji and across the region in helping digitise these, but also be able to help understand where the economic opportunities are and where the conservation needs are as well.
It's interesting that you mentioned the economic opportunities. Seabed mining would be one, but of course that in the Pacific is a very touchy subject.
Yes.
Have you come across some sort of opposition to this? Or?
I'm aware of the debate, and it's certainly one where all governments, I think, need to tread very, very carefully, but also using the expertise that's out there in order to ensure that any resources that a country has access to are extracted in the most sustainable way.
Looking at some of the positives that could come out of this as well is the sustainable fisheries development, rather. The Pacific region, of course, does rely quite heavily on oceans for a lot of stuff. And, well, actually for income generation, that is. What do you think can be done in this regards?
So on sustainable fisheries, there's a number of discussions that are going on this, and I'm by no means across all the detail of that, but at least having the bones of a programme that looks at sustainability, because I think the key issue that the Pacific is facing, well, two key issues. One is around sustainability of stocks and potential migration of stock, and the other is around illegal fishing. There's capacity building being provided through a number of organisations to tackle the latter, but in some cases, a more coherent policy to be able to bring all of these elements together would be very helpful.
Coming back to the program that you had mentioned is underway right now in Vanuatu. Of course, that would be very helpful in Fiji as well, given that we do have quite a number of cruise ships that do come to Fiji, and with better ocean topography maps, we may be able to get better boats.
Yes, and that was behind the first wave of assistance that was given to Fiji under this programme.
And that does fall within the 6 core themes. I was looking at number 4, and this deals with sustainable fisheries development. Do you think there's a real need for this in the region?
Yes, and I think the value of having experts that come out from the UK, they don't come out blind. They are working, the UK itself has a number of overseas territories and so has a deep experience to bring from this. The UK has also had relative success in replenishing its own fishing stocks. So they're able to bring all of that knowledge out. And what's great is when you see 2 technical experts together in the room, you don't need the diplomat. They can do their job and speak their own language. And there's a very good understanding between the technical side on this programme.
Well, thank you for that comment. I'm sure there's more to explore. However, we are constrained by time. We'll be back with more after the break. Welcome back. Now, Ms. Hopkins, moving on to something that's very interesting, and I wish that I had known about this before I would have completed my studies and actually applied for it as well, the Chevening Scholarships.
Yes, well, this is a very exciting area of the work of the British government. And I always say, as High Commissioner in Fiji, I feel very honoured to be doing this role, but when I'm dealing with young scholars, I think I'm the happiest of all. The Chevening programme is the British government's flagship programme. It's for master's level scholarships, and it's a full scholarship, and it enables an individual to be able to be in a UK institution of their choice and to be able to complete their master's studies. The Chevening programme also does other things as well, so it provides additional leadership training, and the really exciting part of it is a successful candidate would get to be able to develop a Chevening network. So you would have the person that would then come back to Fiji, but would come back with a professional and Chevening network of people from all over the world who are also like to be future leaders.
We've had past scholarship holders, not scholarship holders, rather people who have actually gone through this particular program. We've had Fiji's permanent representative to the UN, Nazid Shamin Khan, and also Luke Ndaunivalu, COP23 chief negotiator and Fiji's High Commissioner and designate to Australia. Quite a lot of high-ranking officials. Now, do you think that given that sort of a background, most people who would want to apply would feel a little intimidated?
Well, it is right, I think, that the threshold is quite a high one for Chevening because it's such a big investment in people and it's such a big investment in developing their future leadership capacity. But I would say to anyone that's even in doubt to throw your hat in and try. And the beauty of this scholarship programme is that you can be from all kinds of sectors. So obviously you've named two people there with a strong climate change background. Mm-hmm. And it's true we've awarded a number of scholarships in recent years to help develop that area. But for example, two of the scholars that went out this year were specialised in the treatment of NCDs. And what we're really looking for is for those people then to go to the UK to absorb all of the knowledge and really make the most of that experience and then come back and be able to implement that.
So, of course, it's not limited to one particular field of study,
no.
But there are some fields that you would prefer over others?
So we do roughly try and ensure that the areas that where Chevening is allocated are roughly match the government's own development priorities. But we're looking for leaders that from all walks of life and all fields. So I think my main message to your viewers is to get involved.
And you don't have any certain set number of scholarships that you give out. You're encouraging, of course, for as many people as there are out there to apply. You could have 5 scholarship awardees this year, maybe 10 next year.
That's right. If anything, we would like to see more applicants for the
And the
Chevening
details
programme.
of the scholarship itself, it's a full scholarship, which means it pays for their tuition, it pays for room and board and everything else?
Yes, that's correct.
And how does one access this scholarship?
So you can go onto the website, which is www.chevening.org, or you can also look at our Facebook page, which is UK in South Pacific. And the application process is open now, and it's open until November the 6th.
And you work locally with the Tertiary Scholarship and Loans Board, right?
Yes, so that's a different sort of scholarship. So the UK is also really keen to promote greater exchanges on education between Commonwealth countries. So for this reason, we fund Commonwealth scholarships, which are not administered through us, but they are administered through that board. So again, even though you don't see a Union Jack there, there's UK funding flowing through that, and we hope it's helping young men and women from Fiji to be able to access the very best learning available to them.
And like Chevening, is there a limit on that, or?
Yes, again, there's no number.
Okay.
And again, they'd like to see more applicants from the
keeping
Commonwealth
with
side.
How, are there a lot of people who apply for this scholarship? Is the information out there?
To be frank, I think we need to be working with all of our media partners and just try to get that information out there. So people are always surprised when we talk about it. So I think that shows that we've still got a little way to go. But the really exciting thing is when we start to put then the stories of the scholars onto our Facebook page, for example, it gets a huge number of hits. So if anyone's remotely interested, please go to our Facebook page, UK and South Pacific, and look at some of the inspiring stories that you will find from men and women up and down the country who've gone and done a scholarship in the UK.
So let it be known that a student wishing to apply for these scholarships can access the website, as you mentioned, or visit the TSLB Loans Board, right?
Well, yes, that's a really brilliant program, and I do wish I had completed my program, so I could have applied for that maybe later on. Looking at UK aid footprint in the region, could you please elaborate more on that, especially the work that's been done with the World Bank and other lending institutions?
Yes, so UK is a lead funder of the World Bank, and particularly a program called IDA, which is delivering more in other parts of the Pacific rather than Fiji. The UK is the single largest funder to that programme. We're also a lead funder of the ADB, and obviously we're going to be hearing a lot more about the ADB over the next year or so as we get ready to host. Fiji government will be hosting the ADB meeting next year in 2019. And the UK is within usually the top 5 contributors to any UN agency. So I think the point I'd like to say is, even though your viewers might not see too many Union Jacks there, we are there supporting multilateral institutions. So why are we doing that rather than just handing over some funds directly? The truth is, our experience as a significant development player has shown that if you need to be able to work with institutions that have strong results and evaluation frameworks. And we push all of these multilateral agencies, and we push them quite hard to be able to demonstrate they are doing the best to ensure that those countries really get to see the results of the programs over a longer term.
So when you do partner with these organizations and these networks, the British High Commission provides all of the oversight?
No, so it's done centrally, because obviously there's a huge amount of work that goes into all of that. But for the UK is the only country that has, we're very proud of our 0.7% of GDP, which we devote to overseas aid, but we're the only country to have that actually in our legislation. But because of that, there is an immense amount of parliamentary scrutiny that goes on to our overseas aid footprint to make sure that it really is being distributed in the very best way.
Well, thank you for that. Coming up after the break, we've got something interesting for you. Looking forward to the royal visit that'll be happening to Fiji and Tonga. That and more after this break. Welcome back. Naziat, there was something that you were mentioning off camera that you wanted to explore more with Ms. Hopkins.
Right, so I'm very eager to hear about the royal visit. But before that, let's talk about the UK aid footprint that we finished off with in the last segment. With the growing multilateral, bilateral relations, what can the region expect in the future?
So I think the region can expect still a lot of support through the multilaterals, because those are the best option for us in terms of being able to promote reform, in order to be able to deliver a good quality project, and then also in order to do local capacity building, which is a very important part of this. But I think you will also see a bit more of the UK doing bilaterally, because we've heard the call from a number of Pacific leaders for the UK to be a bit more visible. We'd like to see Union Jacks, is what we normally get told. And I think you'll start to see some more projects. And obviously, we've got these three ones that have come up for CHOGM that we've announced. And I'd like to see some more of those in the future as well. But all of this fits into a much bigger engagement of the UK in the Pacific region. So one of the announcements at the CHOGM was, in fact, that the UK would double its diplomatic footprint in the Pacific region. So doubling the number of diplomatic missions. And that will give us the largest reach of any European partner.
And when you say doubling the footprint, does this only mean more projects that can be expected, or a stronger implementation of some of the commitments made at CHOGM?
This means a doubling in the number of diplomatic missions that the UK has in the region. So at the moment, the UK has 3 diplomatic posts in the South Pacific, and we're going to move to 6 over probably by next year. Because we're keen to see this up and going as soon as possible. But also, you'll see a larger British High Commission presence here in Suva. Part of that is in order to enable us to do a bit more at bilateral level with the government of Fiji, and it's to enable us to do a bit more at regional level as well.
Well, looking forward to the next few months. We're almost nearing the end of 2018. What does the British High Commission have planned so far?
Well, I think the key area for us is obviously around the royal visit, and there's already a huge amount of excitement and expectation around that. Obviously, there's not too much I can say regarding the dates and the details of the programme, but what I can say is that His Royal Highness Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, has long wanted to come to Fiji, and everyone knows he has a very strong connection or enjoys rugby. And so certainly I think that will be something that's in his mind. But also when he was in Afghanistan, when Prince Harry served in Afghanistan, he served alongside Fijians there. So it's fair to say he has a soft spot for Fiji. And really we see this visit as the chance to raise the profile of the Commonwealth and what that means for modern day Fiji. So what that means in terms of values, what that means in terms of environment, and what that means in terms of opportunities for young people.
Well, looking at it from a personal point of view, I've always thought that the Prince reflected some of the qualities of his mother, the late Lady Diana. And one of the things that he is well known for is, of course, engaging with the crowd, engaging with the public, and making them feel as though he's not too far off to, engage with. Him going to Invictus Games in Sydney and loving football, loving rugby rather, I don't know what he would call it. Do you think that there would be any instances or any chances for His Royal Highness to engage with the public here in Fiji? And what about security?
Yes. So there's a long experience, obviously, of being able to balance these two parts for a royal visit. But I think you're absolutely right to say that this is a young, dynamic member of the royal family, and he's very keen to have as much public interaction as possible. So over the next months, we'll be working with all of the stakeholders to ensure there is enough visibility of him and people get the chance to see him. The visit is obviously being held at the request of the President of Fiji. And whilst I can't say too much on the specifics of the programme at this stage, it's no secret that he's very interested in young people and empowering young people, education opportunities for young people, and he's also very interested in environment.
Well, I personally would love to see him come to Fiji and pick up a rugby ball, play some touch with the locals.
It would be great, wouldn't it? Yes.
I wouldn't put it past him.
Yes, yes.
It would be nice to finally see the man I was supposed to marry, I should say. But thank you very much for coming on to the show. And that wraps up our show for tonight. Should you wish to make further queries on the matters discussed, you can contact the British High Commission by visiting their website www.gov.uk/world/Fiji or their Facebook page, UK in the South Pacific. And until next time, have a pleasant evening.